Every family has secrets. Little things, inconvenient truths, quietly swept under the rug and left to gather dust. But some families are hiding secrets so profound, so dark. They could poison everything you thought you knew about your own history, your own blood. Let's begin with a look into the darker side of family history to reveal some of the most shocking secrets ever brought to light. Starting with a story that turns a beloved family hero into an unrecognizable monster. For 65 years, my family had a hero, my grandfather, Arthur. We didn't just love him. We built a shrine to him in our memories. The official story, the one passed down through generations, was that Grandpa Arthur was a fundamentally good man who died in a tragic, random bar fight. It was a story of senseless violence cutting short a noble life. But then, on her deathbed, as the scent of antiseptic hung in the air, my grandmother told me the truth. This one confession, gasped out in her final hours, didn't just rewrite my family's history. It poisoned it, turning a story of honor into a legacy of deceit and violence that now only I know about. The story of my grandfather's death was the cornerstone of my family's identity. In the old, faded black and white photos that sat on every mantelpiece, he was movie star, handsome, with a kind smile that seemed to promise he was exactly the man we believed him to be. He died when my dad was just a toddler, so no one living really knew him. All they had was the legend. It was always told the same way, a cherished ritual at family gatherings. An uncle, or my own dad, would pour a drink, look off into the distance, and start with, your grandpa Arthur was one of a kind. And then the story would unfold. The year is 1958. Arthur, after a long day at his hardware store, is in a local tavern and decides to play the new pinball machine. He's a natural, the silver ball dancing at his command. And soon, a small crowd gathers to watch. But his winning streak attracts the wrong kind of attention. Some local drunk, fueled by cheap whiskey and envy, gets aggressive. Arthur, ever the hero in our story, tries to de-escalate, holding his hands up peacefully. The story always insisted he was never a fighter, but the drunk shoves Arthur. Defending himself, Arthur shoves back. The fight was brutal and blindingly quick. The man pulled a knife. Arthur, outnumbered and caught by surprise, didn't stand a chance. He was stabbed and bled out on the dirty, checkered floor of that tavern, all over a simple game of pinball. The killer was supposedly some transient who vanished into the night, never to be caught. This story made our family feel special. We were the descendants of a man who died a martyr, a good man in a bad world. At the center of it all was my grandmother, Alina, the picture of a dignified, heartbroken widow. For 65 years, she was the silent, steadfast keeper of Arthur's noble memory. She never even considered remarrying. Her entire life seemed to be a quiet, lifelong tribute to the husband so cruelly stolen from her. We all saw her as a saint, a pillar of tragic grace. The narrative was perfect, clean, and simple. And, as I would discover, it was a complete and utter lie. The perfect family myth started to fall apart when my grandmother turned 90 and her health began its final, steep decline. Her mind, once as sharp as a needle, began to fray and wander through the past. It was on her bad days that the first cracks appeared in the story we all knew. I was sitting with her one afternoon, holding her frail hand, when she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves, "He had it coming." I leaned in, confused. "Who had what coming, Grandma?" She turned to me, her eyes unfocused, looking at a ghost in the room. "Arthur, he wasn't a saint. Not a saint at all." We all dismissed it as the confused ramblings of a dying mind. A few days later, she told my aunt, it wasn't the game. It was never about the pinball. We would gently correct her, trying to preserve the story, not just for ourselves, but for her. But sometimes, a flash of the old, sharp Alina would return. "You know nothing," she'd snap, her voice suddenly clear and angry. "You weren't there. You didn't have to clean it up." Clean what up? Those 3 words started to haunt me. He had it coming. It wasn't about the game. You didn't have to clean it up. I started to feel like the whole pinball story was a little too neat. A little too cinematic. The call came around 2 a.m. from the hospice nurse. "It's time," she said softly. When I was finally alone with my grandmother in the sterile, quiet room, her eyes opened, and for the first time in months, they were totally, frighteningly clear. She was lucid. "I have to tell," she rasped, her breath shallow. "God won't let me go until I tell." This was it. A confession, the pinball story, she began, her voice barely a whisper. A lie, all of it. I made it up from whole cloth. The real story was that my hero grandfather, Arthur, wasn't just a simple hardware store owner. That was a front, a respectable mask for his community. His real business was being a brutal, merciless loan shark. He had a partner, a man named Frank Miller, but Arthur got greedy. He decided he didn't want a partner anymore. He lured him out to the old fishing cabin by the lake. Alina whispered, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Told him they had to discuss a big collection. Arthur didn't use a knife. He used a tire iron. He waited until Frank's back was turned and then he struck him. Again and again, with cold, terrifying precision. And this wasn't just Arthur's secret. It was hers too. He came home late that night, she continued, tears finally welling in her eyes, covered in it. He was so calm. He just looked at me with those eyes I thought I knew and said, "It's done. Now you have to help me, Alina," and she did. She was young, terrified of the man she had just seen, of what he was capable of. She did exactly what he said. I burned his clothes in the incinerator. I scrubbed the floor of the car trunk for hours. He had wrapped the body in an old canvas tarp, but it had leaked through. Together, under the cover of darkness, they drove out to the deep woods and buried Frank Miller's body where it would never be found. To seal the lie, Alina provided Arthur with a perfect alibi for that night. But someone must have figured it out. Frank had brothers, and they were just as ruthless as he was. "They found him at that bar," Alina said, her voice cracking. "It wasn't random. They were waiting for him. The fight wasn't about a game of pinball. It was about Frank." It wasn't one drunk. It was 2 of Frank's brothers, there to exact their own justice. They beat him, broke his bones, and then, with their own knife, they left him to die on the floor of that tavern. When the police came knocking on her door, Alina saw a way out. A way to bury the truth about her husband's murder, and her own complicity, forever. "I told them the story," she whispered. "The drunk. The pinball game. The senseless tragedy. It made him a good man. It made me, the poor widow, not the accomplice." She held that secret for 65 years, carrying a truth so heavy it bent her life into a different shape. Then, her grip on my hand loosened. "I'm sorry," she breathed. It was her last word. My grandfather wasn't a hero. He was a monster. And my sainted grandmother, the woman we all adored, was his co-conspirator. That story is a heavy burden, but it's far from the only kind of secret a family can hide. The next story involves a dad who was caught red-handed, trying to abandon his family before it even truly began. One person shared this story. "My dad tried to run out on my mum while she was pregnant with me. He'd been embezzling money from a photography club at his workplace where he was the treasurer and the audit was coming. The whole scheme was about to blow up in his face. So, my dad packed a bag, deciding to cut and run, leaving my pregnant mother to deal with the fallout. By pure dumb luck, my mother's brother and father showed up at the house just as he was quietly trying to slip out the door. My granddad, a burly Scottish coal miner with hands like shovels, got him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. He told him that if he ever pulled a stunt like that again, he'd be a dead man. According to the story that came out years later, my dad wet himself right there on the spot. My granddad, to save the family's name and protect my mother, paid all the embezzled money back so my dad wouldn't lose his job or go to jail. But my mum could never trust him with money again. She had their joint bank account restricted so he couldn't touch it, and opened a separate one to control all the bills. She went back to work as a primary school teacher so she could always support herself and me, which was really uncommon in rural Scotland back then. There was no childcare for kids under 4, so for the first few years of my life, I slept in a wicker basket in the big, dark stationery cupboard in her classroom. It's funny, at my mum's funeral, her former colleagues were still coming up to me, their faces softening with memory, and saying, "Oh, it's the baby from the cupboard." From financial betrayal to a fortune literally stolen from a blind woman. This next story is about a level of greed that tore a family apart. Here's the story of a stolen inheritance. My family could have been worth millions. My great-grandfather built a successful company from the ground up called Johnson Corrugated. We made corrugated cardboard, the stuff used for shipping boxes all over the country. It was a potential empire. My grandfather was supposed to inherit that company some 30-odd years ago, until his brother, Uncle Randy, happened. My great-grandmother was still alive at the time and was technically the owner of the company. She was also functionally blind and deaf, living in a quiet, isolated world. Uncle Randy saw his opportunity. He went to her house, impersonated my grandfather's voice and presence, and had his own trusting, disabled mother sign the entire company over to him. He cashed out immediately, selling it for $15 million. He gave half of that money to his son, who promptly fled to Europe after the death threats from the rest of the family started pouring in. Randy himself died from a fast-moving cancer within a month of fleeing. Nobody from the family went to his funeral, and, to this day, my relatives make a point to desecrate his grave whenever they're in that town. My grandpa is now 80 years old and can't retire. He's been fighting this in court for the past 20 years, trying to reclaim what was stolen. And now he owes about $300,000 in legal fees. I found all this out one afternoon after stumbling upon a huge, dusty stack of legal documents in my grandpa's attic. We still don't know where Randy's son, my cousin, is. Some secrets aren't about money or betrayal, but about the monsters hiding in plain sight. The people who are supposed to protect you. This next one is truly chilling. I was always told my dad left me when I was born. Which is technically true, but they invented a completely different person for me to imagine as my father. I never questioned it until I had to use my birth certificate to join the military. The name listed for my father was Alexander Smith, and my last name is also Smith, but my family had always told me, quite casually, that they picked my last name from a baby book because they liked the sound of it. Something felt off. I spent a couple of days digging into public records, researching this Alexander Smith, and everything started to add up. What sold it for me, the detail that made my stomach drop, was that his mother's name was Natasha, which was my own grandmother's name. I confronted my family with the document in my hand, and they finally broke down and revealed the whole, horrific truth. After I was born, Alexander decided he didn't want any kids, and he didn't want me. So one night, he came into my room and tried to smother me in my sleep. He was stopped by my older brother and my uncle, who fought him off. He fled the house. They called the police, but he returned in the middle of the night, full of rage. He set fire to our house. In the chaos of the fire, our family dog was killed, and, as he was escaping, he caused the death of an elderly lady in a neighboring house. He was arrested and sent to prison for life, where he later died. My family said they wanted to keep it a secret, so I wouldn't have to grow up knowing my own dad was a psychopath murderer who had tried to kill me. They had written a letter explaining everything, planning on giving it to me when I left for the military, but I figured it out on my own beforehand. It's terrifying to learn, a parent is a monster, but sometimes an entire family conspires to hide its darkness, leaving behind a trail of discarded people and unforgivable acts. One user revealed that their family had not one, but multiple horrifying secrets buried just beneath the surface. Secret 1. The disabled kid. I was an adult when I discovered my parents had an older son, their first child. When he was preschool-aged, doctors told them he was mentally deficient. Horrified at the social shame and the burden, they turned him over to the state and never ever spoke of him again, pretending he never existed. Years later, word got back to them through the grapevine that the child was not, in fact, disabled at all. He had an auditory processing disorder. With proper support, he grew up to be a fully functioning, independent adult. When my dad finally reached out to him, This son he had thrown away, refused to have any contact with a family that had discarded him. Totally fair. Secret 2. The pedophile. The very same father who gave away his son because of a mistaken disability was also a child rapist. When they were grown, my dad and his younger brother learned that their own father had raped their sister on multiple occasions, threatening her into a terrified silence. She didn't tell anyone until long after it all happened, long after she had escaped that house. But in a turn that no one can comprehend, she later reconnected with her father, and even allowed him to spend time with her own children. Sometimes, the secret isn't a ghost from the past, but a deception happening right now, in front of everyone's eyes. My 11-year-old cousin got pregnant. And it was such a shocking situation that she was even featured on Dr. Phil's television show. After the baby was born, the 11-year-old's aunt adopted the baby to raise as her own. Now, about 12 years later, they haven't told the child any of this. The daughter, who is now a preteen herself, thinks her grandmother is her aunt, and she thinks her biological mother is just her older cousin. The truly wild part is that the biological mother and daughter look absolutely identical. The daughter has seen pictures of her mum from when she was a kid and has said, "That's funny, I don't remember taking that picture." And the family just laughs it off, letting her believe it's a picture of herself, all while this massive secret hangs in the air. They're just letting her believe it's her. The stories we inherit from our families define us, but sometimes the realest, most formative stories are the ones we were never meant to hear. It makes you wonder what secrets are buried in your own family tree, and what cherished stories you've been told are just convenient fictions designed to hide a much darker truth. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever discovered something that completely changed how you saw your own family. These stories remind us that history is fragile, and the people we think we know best can sometimes be complete strangers. If you found these stories as wild as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for listening.